Welcome to the Juris Doctor and Postgraduate Law Careers video series presented by UNSW Law Society. Before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in and viewing this panel. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I am Adriana Ishac and I am joined with my colleague, Colleen Gonzales today to bring to you a video about careers in criminal law. We are pleased to welcome Marco Olea, a Juris Doctor graduate and a faculty member at UNSW. Thank you for joining us, Marco.
G'day guys. Just to clarify, I was a faculty member at UNSW. I used to teach criminal law and evidence and foundations. And currently I'm a Federal Prosecutor with the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions based in the city.
Fantastic. Well, you've already started a little bit, but could you just please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you ended up in your career path today?
Yeah, no worries. First, I want to look upon it as a career path or even necessarily a career. Conceptualizing it like that often leads to a lot of the pitfalls that students get into in terms of mindset while they're studying. I personally always just try to look upon it as the next stage of what I'm doing that aligns with my interests and my values. Now, each of those are potent words, but I think there's something that each student themselves has to address for themselves. What do I mean by that? Well, what is the criminal law? Okay, I could go into what a federal prosecutor is, what I do, what my colleagues do, and what criminal lawyers do every day. But there are a lot of testimonials out there from people with far more experience than me that could give adequate insight into that. I mean, it's prosecutions. I'm sure everyone's got an idea as to what that involves, as you would if someone says they work in defense. But often that's the problem, is that you have an idea of what those jobs entail rather than actually knowing what it is. And when you get into that mindset as a student, you're going to tell yourself, I want to work as a criminal lawyer. I want to be a criminal defense lawyer. I want to be a public defender. I want to work in commercial law. I want to be this type of lawyer. I want to be that type of lawyer, without actually understanding what it is that a lawyer does. And you guys are in a beneficial position of being JDs where you actually came into this degree, one, having had life experience prior to that, having had another degree, and having had some idea of where your interests lie. Don't lose that. All right, you're already in a more advantageous position in some regards than undergraduates who come into it straight from high school, who a lot of them, unfortunately, as at least was my experience when I was teaching foundations of law, are doing it because their parents told them to do it, or because they got the good marks and they thought that's what they have to do. They have to do law. They don't know what law is. In terms of the criminal law and how you can get into the criminal law, first of all, consider what is the criminal law. You have an interest in the criminal law, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video. And that interest includes even just thinking about, oh yeah, I could see myself doing that stuff I see on TV. What is it about the criminal law that interests you? Why is it interesting? Why is it something that you've considered wanting to do? Do you want to be a practitioner? Do you know what a practitioner does? Etc., etc. Ask yourself, what is it about the criminal law that interests you? And that will often guide you as to where you look for opportunities to get more experience. So always, especially as a student, what I would recommend is look upon every encounter, everything you do, more as an experience, informing your knowledge, informing your view of the world, rather than this is the category in which I have to fall into once I've graduated. My path to where I am right now, I just said path and I said don't look upon it as a path. How I got to my current job was just the same as how I got into my job as a lecturer, and even into the law degree before that, even into, I used to work in Latin America for a non-government organization teaching kids in indigenous communities. Before that, I did a psych degree. I've worked in a factory for $10 an hour making kitchens, okay? How did I get into these things? Not necessarily due to any pre-planning or grand desire to do it, but because the opportunity came and I took it. Oftentimes out of necessity. I did that factory job out of necessity. No one wants to be earning $10 an hour under the table. When I graduated, well, first of all, when I studied, as I was studying, I had an interest in criminal law. It was a personal interest because, well, I grew up in an environment where I saw these sorts of things and I had some familiarity with it. And while I was studying, I wanted to understand why these things happen. Because let's face it, crime is everywhere, no matter how you conceptualize it. And crime has the ability to affect everyone. For me personally, I wanted to see my place as against this phenomenon in society and how I could do something with regards to this. So at first, it was an intellectual endeavor. My undergraduate degree was in psychology and sociology. I didn't have any particular interest in doing a PhD in psychology or becoming a practitioner. So I saw law as well, rather naively, as a means to actually make a change in the world. I say it naively because of a lack of knowledge at the time, rather than the statement itself actually being naive inherently. In order to actually understand what this crime and all that stuff in society was around me, I needed to know the legal framework in which it all occurs, because law does govern more or less everything we do in society. And that's oftentimes a scary thing to consider. So while I was studying, I did all the criminal law subjects. Again, personal interest. And each of them showed me a different realm of what is criminal law. When I took the elective, that was even better, because I got to meet academics who experienced themselves, and those academics often had guest lecturers who came into our classes and told us a little bit of what they did, kind of akin to what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And then after that, you realize there's only so much that an educational environment can do. You actually have to show some initiative. That's what everyone has to do at one point in their lives. So I went out looking for volunteer opportunities as a student. It was the same problem then when I was a student, that there were often there was difficulty in finding support or even information about how to get into the criminal law. What is a criminal lawyer's job? So I just had to look for the strangest of volunteering opportunities. I did an internship with the Inspector of Custodial Services over one summer. It was just an intensive internship, but we actually got to go to juvenile detention centres and take a look at what it was. We helped draft submissions regarding the standards by which juvenile detention centres across New South Wales had to adhere to. I was just a student. I wasn't under no illusions as to my ability to contribute to the overall project. What I knew I could take from that is that I could learn something. Even if something's so small, you never know how it will contribute to your better understanding of the world later on. Also, whilst I was a student, just by sheer happenstance, one of my classes, they had a guest lecturer from the public defenders, and we were required to do an internship, not even internship, placement of 1 day, shadowing public defenders and shadowing a judge in the district court. Fucking great experience, even if it was just for 1 day. I was towards the end of my degree. This is when everyone was applying for commercial clerkships. I didn't give a fuck about that. All due respect to those who do, that was never my cup of tea, and even up to now, it's not. So instead of doing that commercial clerkship applications, I wanted to make the most of that summer. I still wanted to learn. So I actually called up the public defenders and emailed the judge that I sat with, each occasion just one time, and I asked, is there the possibility of me obtaining some experience over summer? I ended up doing a whole 3-month internship, 3 days a week over summer with the public defenders, and a 2-day internship, or more of like a, say, practical placement, unofficial practical placement with a judge of the district court for 2 days a week, where I sat with the judge and I just observed court proceedings. We'd go to his chambers afterwards and he talked to me as to what just happened there. With the public defenders, I was assisting in trials and manslaughter appeals and murder trials as a student. How the fuck did I get that experience? Honestly, people are going to say, oh, you're lucky. Well, no, I just sent an email. That was it. People think it's something magical about getting these things, about having connections in order to be able to be placed in a job where you can get some experience. So much more of it relies upon what you want and what you want to do. There is no set path. You don't have to do a clerkship. You don't have to become an associate. You don't have to get the job at legal aid. You don't have to get a job at prosecutions if you want to work in the criminal law field.
So you did mention how a lot of the time students don't know exactly what like a daily life as a criminal lawyer or just any kind of job in criminal law would look like. So could you just share with us what an average day looks like in your current job?
Yep. I'll also speak to my colleagues as well, because there are ups and downs in terms of the workload and things you'll be doing. Sometimes you'll only be doing a lot of administrative work in preparation for a court matter. Other times you'll be in court for weeks on end because, say, you have a trial. So there is no average day. That's one of the things, I guess, that's exciting, but also stressful, is that it's hard to predict sometimes. And as students, when you're studying, you're often used to deadlines and knowing how to prepare for yourself. I do this by this day, I do this, and it's set. One thing I always encourage my students when I was a teacher is accept uncertainty in so many regards. Find comfort in that and have comfort and trust in your own confidence. That's what it's like as a practitioner, at least from my experience so far. There are the general things you'll always be doing with regards to preparing for court appearances, say trials, sentences, or even administrative motions and mentions and things like that. But in terms of what you're doing every day, it's not what you may think is like on TV, because no jobs are quite like that on TV. There is a lot of that, but there is also a lot of the behind the scenes work that never gets portrayed in the general public. There's a reason for that. It's like any administrative aspect of any job, is that it's not the most exciting thing, but really it's the backbone of any job. If a student wants to become a criminal lawyer, what I would suggest is that, one, you gain an appreciation first of what is the criminal law. What I used to teach personally was that, and I still hold on to this view, is that the criminal law is ultimately about the human condition. It shows all of us what each and every single one of us, without exception, is capable of doing if we just have one bad day. Okay, there before the grace of God lies I, on the other side of that dock. All of us are just one bad day away from being on the other side of that dock, but it's never as black and white as we would otherwise like to think it is. It's only when you get involved in the nuances of it, when you actually get involved in it, do you see how complex it is. You're often confronted with ethical issues on a daily basis, particularly as a prosecutor, you have additional obligations as an officer of the court or a minister of justice, as they say. But it is a lot of thinking, a lot of writing, or communication in general. But it can also be very rewarding. It is actually very rewarding. You just don't see it at the time, if it aligns with your values. So I'm sorry, I can't really say what is an average day like, because there is no average day. In terms of if every single day is satisfying, with every job, you're going to be confronted with that question. With the criminal law, if your values are right, and if you're in there for the right reasons, you'll find that satisfaction every day. You might just not realize it.
Well, I mean, you touched on it really briefly, but you were talking about embracing uncertainty and telling your students to embrace uncertainty. And I think now more than ever, we've heard from other testimonials say that there's no really one pathway to follow after you graduate from your Juris Doctor. And so nowadays, instead of having this set path for us, we are very uncertain about what comes next. So I was just wondering, when you finished your Juris Doctor, what did you find was the most unexpected challenge that came from taking your next step after graduating?
Knowing what the fuck I wanted to do. No, legit. I was still in the mindset saying that what I do after graduation is going to determine my career for however long, for a number of years. And it's absolutely ridiculous and absurd to have that idea drilled into you, or even to take it upon yourself to internalize it. When I graduated, I had no idea what I was doing. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I always had the interest in the criminal law. Like I said, I was doing a lot of those volunteer placements, but I was also still intellectually curious. And I was scared that if I actually settled into a practitioner's job, I would lose that intellectual curiosity and the academic side of things, which is not true. But at the time, that's what I believed. So I was fortunate enough to have been offered a job lecturing just casually at first, just teaching evidence. And then I continued on with that for 4 years because I loved it. It was always in the criminal law or any other. I also did foundations of law. And then I eventually decided to move on to practice, into this job here right now, into prosecutions. I never thought I would do it. I never had the goal of doing it whilst I was a student. I think the important thing that I realized over time is that you cannot fucking predict where you are going to be. And that's the exciting thing, guys. I know it looks disheartening to say, how am I going to get a job? We're in COVID, so many other applicants. And these are the same refrains that all students have heard for however many years. Look at it differently. try to look at it as not what job are you going to get, but what job is going to allow me to feel satisfied with, one, I'm doing something that aligns with my personal values. Two, I'm definitely contributing something to this job, because people want to be valued. All of you guys are better than that. You're not cogs in a machine, and don't let yourselves become that, okay? In so much as you're contributing to the job that you're engaging in, make sure you're getting something from that as well. If you're not learning, if you're not growing as a person, do not take a job or stay in that job just because you think there's a scarcity out there, or I'm not going to find something else, or because I think I have to do this. That's bullshit. You guys need to realize that you're the ones who are worth here. And in as much as you are applying for them and competing for limited roles, they should be competing to retain you or attract you in the first place. Yeah, those concerns are real. Part of the reason I didn't apply for a lot of practical legal jobs when I graduated, because like I said, at that time, one, I didn't want to support the normalization of exploitation of students, because a lot of the private criminal law jobs are offering $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And I imagine these days it's still very low. Bullshit, you guys are worth more than that. Don't allow that exploitation to occur. Insofar as one of you accepts it, people are going to think all of you would be willing to. You're better than that. I met so many brilliant young lawyers out there, both in practice and as students. None of you deserve to lower yourselves to that level. On the other hand, say you do find a job that offers you a lot of money. Is it worth it? You all are all adults now, being graduates. You come from some degree of having been out there in the world, having had a job before. Don't lower yourself to the level of just another peasant. There are no peasants in contemporary society. This isn't fucking feudal or medieval Europe. You guys are worth something. Put yourselves first there. Is the job you're doing consistent with why you were interested in the criminal law in the first place? Is the job you're doing recognizing that you have something to contribute to the criminal law? And are you getting recognized for that financially as well? Because if those answers are a no, then guess what? You can do better. There is more to the criminal law than being a solicitor. That is the important thing to realize as well, okay? In terms of those options, a lot of people don't think about it. Say even academia as well. I never intended to become an academic. That option just came before me, and I embraced it as a new experience. The same with this job right now as a federal prosecutor. It's a great job, but I'm not anchoring myself to it for the next 20 years at this stage. I'm only 32, okay? And I've only been doing it for a year. Why would anyone make that mistake? So given that uncertainty, just say, from that uncertainty comes excitement and possibilities. Same with your reasoning processes when you're actually, as a student in university, and creating a new argument. It all stems from uncertainty. Beautiful things can come from that.
I was going to ask a very common student question, which is how important is securing clerkships and volunteer experience and kind of other relevant extracurricular activities like doing competitions and mooting and such stuff like that for students in securing a job in criminal law. But I think you kind of touched on that a lot, and how, yeah, it's not necessarily critical to securing a job, but it might help with finding where your interests lie, kind of thing. Do you want to speak a little bit more on that?
And I think that's the most important thing as well, is that people need to get over the idea that a number, a WAM, determines your value or your ability in the market. Firstly, if you are going to volunteer for an organization or a charitable-based organization, say a CLC, or somewhere a pro bono organization, I would say far be it for me to say this, but fuck it, I'm going to say it anyway. Do it because you actually care. Don't do it for a pragmatic benefit. Don't do it to try to bolster up your resume. If you don't actually care, don't do it, because you're taking up the space of people out there who actually do care and actually want to contribute something to this important field. For those of you, most of you are, I haven't encountered those students at UNSW Law when I was teaching. You guys are great. Associateships, clerkships, competitions, and all of that, okay? Do it because you are going to get something out of that. It's not the marks. I'm telling you that now. People may look at marks as an initial screening process or filtering process. Don't worry about that. There are other avenues. It's unfortunate that people are still holding those as WAM or HDs as an indice of competency or capability in the practical world. It's just not true. They may correlate with it, but they don't determine it, and they're not certainly equivalent. Get the competitions and experiences under your belt for the experience. Communication is so incredibly important in the legal profession or the legal field at all. You are not going to get a better chance at that than whilst you're in university, because you can afford to make big mistakes. And everyone makes mistakes, everyone. In terms of volunteering, get the volunteering experience, because you might see you're quite capable of doing things you had no idea you could do. And you might see you have interests you never thought you had before. By way of example, I did part of my PLT in a refugee center. And I was interviewing clients who fled the war in Mali and were showing me their bullet wounds in their arm when they were fleeing soldiers. I gained something personal from that, and I never fucking thought I'd ever do something like that. And that all helped shape the person I was when I was going to the next stage of wherever it is I was going. So there's competitions, mooting, mock trial, witness examination, negotiations, do them. Don't be scared, and don't look at it as intimidating. Look at it as a fun opportunity, because it's supposed to be fun. Guys, people in court, in real court, they should take enjoyment in what they're doing too, because advocacy is fun and engaging and rewarding as well. In terms of volunteer opportunities, like I said, if you want to use me as an example, you never know where you're going to end up. Inspector of Custodial Services. Never heard of them before I did that placement. Never been to a juvenile detention center prior to that placement. Public defenders, I never fucking thought I would. I've still got a good relationship with them now. Even as a lecturer, I was referring students there for placements because they're great people and I learn a lot from them. That judge I sat with, one of the fairest judges in the land, according to others after the fact who told me that, and I could definitely see what they were saying. I learned a lot from that. The opportunities that are available, guess what? You have nothing to lose. You really don't, whilst you're a student. Once you're finding yourself on the way to actually securing employment, that's when I would say, look at the jobs that you think are interesting and see if, for the short term at the very least, you could feel comfortable with the description they've provided, with what it may involve. Because guess what? Until you're actually there, you have no idea what it actually involves. You're not locked into anything for life, guys. You really aren't. In terms of practical advice, in terms of where to look for your students, look to places that you haven't heard of. How the fuck can you look to places you haven't heard of if you haven't heard of it? Look to more esoteric or less known stuff. Everyone knows about legal aid and the state DPP. Commonwealth DPP, we got a program. I didn't know too much about the Commonwealth DPP before I saw the application. New South Wales Crime Commission, even as a paralegal, great experience. One of the guys in our office has just recently gotten a job there. New South Wales Crime Commission, Aboriginal Legal Service, incredibly rewarding stuff. A couple of the prosecutors who I work with now spent years working in the Dubbo office of the Aboriginal Legal Service. Some of the kindest and most insightful people I've ever met. Associateships. People think you just have to apply for a tipstar position in the Supreme Court. I would certainly recommend applying to the district court, where it's more likely you get more criminal law exposure, but also don't overlook being an assistant to a magistrate, an associate to a magistrate, even in the federal magistrates courts. It may not necessarily be criminal law, but guess what? You're getting an understanding of courtroom procedure like no one else can, and that will allow you to decide whether you could see yourself doing that. There is something to be gained from every experience. Do not be disheartened. For those of you wishing to go into private practice and are willing to take my observations on board, you're all good students. You're diligent young men and women. All of you are young, just some younger than others. Even I'm supposedly young. If you're going to work in private practice, work in a private practice that respects what the criminal law represents and what the role of a defense lawyer actually is. Because the community deserves that. Okay. Same, not even just private practice. If you're going to work in any area as a practitioner, whether in defense or prosecutions, I would ask you, as the future of the legal profession, to do everything you do with diligence and in a way that's consistent with some form of ethical code. we have the solicitor's rules, there are the barrister's rules, but internally, you guys intuitively know what it means to be a good person and to do something right. In everything you do, make sure you do that, because the community deserves it. And if you think, and you'll come to see that it's all about serving the community, whether as a prosecutor or in defense, or even in any other area of criminal law, say commissions of inquiry and whatnot. What I'm ultimately saying is that talk to people, talk to your lecturers, your criminal law lecturers, man. No one's going to have better connections or knowledge about it at this stage of your life than them. Look to people such as, say, if you knew someone who was a former student themselves and practicing criminal, ask them, what are some of the opportunities? They are there. Unfortunately, due to the way some law, programs are structured in university, the pathways to there require a bit more independent effort. That what I'm trying to show you is that if a kid like me, a boy from Campbelltown who didn't have the nicest of backgrounds and shit, can do the things that I've done, which other people often look upon as, oh, cool or nice, or I'd like to do that myself. If some dickhead like me can do that, guess what? Any one of you are capable of doing that. And I mean that. I really do. You just have to be willing to put in the hard yards. And guess what? You guys being where you are right now means you're more than willing.
So always very comforting to hear that sort of thing. And I just wanted to ask, because you were talking about reaching out to our teachers and reaching out to people for advice and help. And I think, speaking personally, it's been harder, I think, to connect with teachers with the COVID situation, because we started online last year. And so what would you say to any students who want to reach out to a teacher for some form of advice or mentorship, who might be a little bit nervous about approaching a teacher? What would you say the best thing to do is?
The role of a teacher is beyond standing in a classroom and speaking words to their students, expecting them to digest it and occasionally find pearls of wisdom fall in their laps. For me, the role of a teacher was to actually try to encourage your students to empower your students to be able to do it for themselves and to actually develop that interest, to be passionate, to be diligent, to actually care about this. And if you have a teacher who's doing their job right, they will be excited to hear from students such as yourself who are actually interested in the field in which they specialize in, whether in an academic sense, say you want to pursue academia in that route, or in a practical sense. Don't underestimate the willingness of a lecturer or a teacher to help their students out. There are some fine people in that faculty, and I'm sure there are more fine people there now that I didn't have the pleasure of working with. Reach out to them and ask them and tell them, I'm very much interested in pursuing a career in the criminal law, or I have some interest in the criminal law. I was wondering if it was possible for A, B, and C, whether you want have a conversation with them about what careers there are, something along the lines of what I've been discussing now. Even if you just want some reassurance for people from people who've been in the same position as you. Because guess what? Your criminal law academics, they were students as well once upon a time. And they didn't just get to where they are just by waking up one morning. They found a path as well. If someone doesn't respond to you in an engaged way or express a willingness to actually assist, don't worry about it. There are others out there who would. Fuck, I'm one of them. That's why I'm talking with you guys right now, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So as a former JD student, you're obviously no stranger to the stresses of law school or that comes with that. I think a lot of students want to know how you managed your stress and how you found balance while studying. And did that kind of stress carry on like after you graduated into like your job? And any advice and tips?
I did stress a lot. I just never tried to show it as a student. I would do the hours, but the thing that pissed me off is that I had classmates who were doing so many more hours, working so much harder than me, but they didn't get the recognition. A lot of the time it was just due to language barriers or whatnot, which is why I respect the effort so much more than the final mark. Personally, I did stress out. I did spend a lot of time in that JD study lab, but I also did that. And once I graduated, I promised myself I'm never going to do that again. And I don't with work. Why? Because it may sound controversial, but killing yourself over a degree or a job is not worth it, guys. take it from me as someone who was in your situation, who fell into the pitfalls of making university probably 80% of their life. You lose a lot personally from that. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your relationships with other people. And it has the potential to have catastrophic consequences if you don't meet up to the standard, the arbitrary standard that you set for yourself. And it's unjustified to have those consequences. When I graduated, it was only with the benefit of hindsight, I actually saw how bad it was that I did that, because none of that was necessary in order for me to actually have performed decently at university. When I'm doing this now, or working now, I've tried to have a very clear delineation between my work hours and just my life. Okay, guys? It's not worth it. No job is worth sacrificing your personal life or your mental health, or no degree is. So many things, there's so much more important than that. So all I would encourage is, I understand that circumstances can lead a person to be stressed when they really can't do much more than progress through it, than just do what they can, and when they get at the end goal, recover. But when you're in that situation, it's hard to actually see yourself in there until it's too late. So have those connections with your friends. Have those connections with your family, because the legal profession itself is incredibly collegial, and it starts at law school, guys.
I think that kind of stress and trying to find that balance is only exacerbated with Juris Doctor and postgraduate students who have families. Sometimes they're working part-time or full-time. They do their classes at night, they're exhausted. They have to, factor in all those things. So I think we all really appreciate what you said about just trying to go at your own pace, do what you can.
That's the thing. That's a very important point you raised right there, because obviously those are circumstances of having a family, working full-time, because I studied full-time. I can't speak to those, not having been in those circumstances myself, but what I can say is some of the most diligent people I studied with were those who did it part-time, who were never in any rush, who were under no illusions as to the importance of that degree for their life. And guess what? It carries on in the professional world, because some of the people I studied with, who studied part-time, who had families, who were working, they finished later than me. A couple of them are my colleagues right now in the workplace. It may be a matter of time. It may take a little bit longer to get to that place where you see yourself wanting to get to, but you'll get there eventually. So what's the rush? Do everything in a way that is healthy. Take my words with a grain of salt, again, because I can't speak to what it's like, and absolute respect to those who manage to juggle full-time job and family commitments for the JD degree. If it means that much to you to be able to juggle that, then no, there's no rush. Take your time. That's all I will say.
You were talking earlier about how in criminal law, the only jobs aren't just being a solicitor, and there's a lot of other opportunities. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you've seen the field of criminal law as a not a career field, but like what jobs and opportunities there are when you first started and what you're seeing now and what's changed.
I'm probably not the best person to comment on that in terms of a comparison of when I first started to what's changed now, because I've only been in my current position for just over a year. But in terms of what I've seen and what has changed is that appreciation of what the criminal law actually entails beyond the courtroom and where you can go. Law reform commissions, making reforms regarding the current state of the criminal law. All of this law comes from somewhere, and it comes from people. Law reform commissions play a huge part in that. Even working for the Law Society, working on law reform projects. I'll bring that back to what I originally started with, is it's not about the job itself, but whether or not that job allows you to express the values that you hold to be important. So say you want to work with, it's a very sensitive issue, but it's very important. Say you become aware of the high rates of domestic violence in society over recent times that are just being reported. That's not denying that it's always been present, but now we're becoming more aware through the statistics and social media. You don't have to be a police prosecutor in order to get involved in that area. You don't have to be a defense lawyer in order to get involved in that area. There are organizations involved in social work where a lawyer could definitely have a huge impact upon that. As a liaison, we have social workers in our office who assist with witnesses and victims. In terms of, say, to use that domestic violence example, working in refuges, women's refuges, working in juvenile detention centers even. A lot of people would not have thought of that as an option, but working in a detention center is obviously for the criminal law. You're a correctional officer. Okay. Working in community corrections is some of the most rewarding things I would see, although very challenging, is because you're responsible for the reintegration of people into society who have been subject to a criminal sanction. You're the important role that stops these people from going back to the conduct that led them into incarceration in the first place. And that's not something that's appreciated. In that example, if your values are working with people, helping people rehabilitate themselves, helping people transition back into a society, and even helping people find a job and accommodation, that's the realm of criminal law. It's all criminal law. And those are people we work with every day. Guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a lesson to be learned from every experience, no matter where you end up. You have an interest in the criminal law, the subject matter, ask yourself why, and look to how you can manifest that. It doesn't have to be as a defense lawyer, as a prosecutor. There is a role for you in so many different facets of the world out there, and I can't even tell you because I don't know them all, obviously, but they're there. You just have to be willing to look for it.
It's especially true that the scope of criminal law jobs out there is so vast for JD and PG students, because we all come from different education backgrounds, different work experience backgrounds. So the diversity of roles we can get into or even like create is even more so than, you know, other degrees or other bachelors. So I think that's a really good point. And we sometimes get kind of conditioned to thinking, oh, am I going to be a prosecution lawyer? Am I going to be a defense lawyer? Am I going to work in a legal center? Am I going to work in-house? And like, we think that's our own options. And it's just really refreshing to kind of think, no, that's not true. There's other things out there that might align more with my values, and it kind of eliminates those stresses and anxieties that you might necessarily associate with those limited roles.
It's true. It's so true.
How do you deal with this kind of cultural narrative that lawyers are the bad guys, you know, especially a criminal lawyer or a defense lawyer? How do you represent the guilty? How do you deal with that, you know, friends or families or strangers when you tell them your job title? What's your response to those kind of statements?
Because it means if it's something important to you as to why you're doing it, you don't necessarily have to justify yourself to everyone. If a person asks and they're just asking for the sake of conversation, you don't need to go in the whole personal spiel. You can just tell them whatever it is you do. Oh, it's just a job. I do my, and literally it is just a job. I do my job, people do their job. It's literally all it is. I mean, a lot of the time in law school, and that's what I try to discourage, is that people give themselves an inflated degree of self-importance simply by virtue of either studying law and being a lawyer. For me, what do I answer? I don't. Because I don't even know myself yet. I'm learning. I mean, it may seem like I know I have the answer. I could give the spiel or the answer that a lot of, you know, it's the old story. What a person at a party asks you that question, if you're a defense lawyer, how do you defend someone who's guilty or not? You could just give them the bog standard answers as to everyone in society deserves representation, or there's a presumption of innocence, you don't know they're guilty, or you can even do the real cynical one, is that innocence is a legal fiction. Because in the context of a courtroom, truth does not exist. It's whether or not the Crown has proved this case beyond reasonable doubt. That's something completely different. But I personally think that's something that's going to take a lot of time. If you really value it, it'll take a long time for you to realize what it actually means and why you do what you do. And if you feel conflicted at any times, maybe that's when you should really start addressing the question. Because if you address that question every single day, every time you do something, you'll never get anything done, and you might not actually feel comfortable doing anything. It sounds a bit naive, but I'm currently doing this job because it's important. Okay. Read into that what it means is it's an important job, and the community deserves for it to be done right. And the same with a defense lawyer. The community deserves it to be done right. Because we live in a society of people, guys, and fuck, like I said, you're not going to find an area of law more about the human condition than crime. Really won't. People want to see the face of a society walk into its prisons. Is that Dostoevsky or Gandhi? No, that was Dostoevsky. Gandhi was, if you want to see the true face of a society, see how they treat their most vulnerable, or some shit like that. I don't know. You're getting me to reflect upon my
Oh, no.
the job itself. So, no, that's not bad.
So to finish off, is there any kind of general advice you want to share with current students who are interested in pursuing a career in criminal law, or just any kind of thing you want to end on?
You guys are more than just law students, and you're more than just future lawyers. Put that first. And if you really truly appreciate that and place importance on that, you'll end up in the right place at the end. Whether it's in the criminal law or not, and if it is in the criminal law, whether as a practitioner, solicitor, academic, or otherwise. Learn to trust yourself, to listen to yourself, and have confidence in your own judgment. Because I know that law school can do a lot to undermine all of those factors. It's bullshit. You'll be fine. Just be patient and stick with it, guys. I mean it.
Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to keep an eye out for our other videos on careers in public law and private law as well. Thank you so much for joining our panel.